The Oracle of Delphi remains one of the most captivating and enigmatic wonders of the ancient world. Delphi has a multi-layered history, from its mythical origins and the birth of its sacred traditions to the complex rituals performed by the revered Pythia and the priestesses who delivered prophecies that shaped the destinies of empires. I forgot to do a proper intro, so I'm just adding in one now. Welcome to the channel. My name is Flario. If you're new here, welcome back if you've been here before. Today's episode, since I cover a lot of psychic stuff on this channel, I thought it might be fun to do some ancient history of, I guess, the first recorded psychics, because technically, I mean, there's probably some caveman ones out here, but the oracles of Delphi are very well known and have a lot more information on them. So I thought it would be kind of cool to cover some of the first psychics in human history. We're going to dive into the story of Delphi, as well as looking at the science behind the visions that the oracles had. Was it just chemicals, or was there something more to it? So join me today as we piece together myth, history, and modern ideas to see how Delphi became such a pivotal piece of ancient civilization. Let me first introduce the city and the architecture, and then we'll get into the actual mythos and the legend. And then we'll get into the oracles, and we'll discuss what was maybe causing their visions. The birth of a major power. Archaeological evidence shows that Delphi was occupied continuously from the Neolithic period, which is between 10,000 and 4,500 BCE, through the Mycenaean era, which was 1600 to 1100 BCE. And into classical antiquity, which is the European history between 8th century BC and 5th century AD. It encompasses the civilizations of ancient Greece and Rome. Over the centuries, the site underwent numerous phases of construction, destruction, and restoration, reflecting the turbulent history of the region itself. Delphi's origins can be traced back to the Neolithic period, when small farming communities settled in the region, attracted by its fertile plains and the abundant water sources from the Pleistocene River. As these early settlers developed agricultural practices, they left behind evidence of ritual activity such as primitive votive offerings and symbolic objects that hint at a growing spirituality. During the early Bronze Age, the inhabitants began to establish rudimentary shrines and altars, suggesting an early veneration of natural forces and deities, which is a precursor to the later, more elaborate cultic-type practices of ancient Greece. By the Mycenaean era, which was, again, 1600 to 1100 BCE, Delphi was already an important regional center. The Mycenaeans, renowned for their architectural prowess and complex social organization, built fortified settlements in the surrounding hills. Archaeological excavations have uncovered pottery fragments, metal artifacts, and remnants of early structures that indicate Delphi's integration into the broader Mycenaean world. These findings suggest that as early as the late Bronze Age, Delphi was evolving into a main location for religious activity, with local elites supporting the construction of sacred spaces that would later be dedicated to more formalized religions. Religion spawning urban growth. The gradual rededication of the site from the worship of Gaia to the cult of Apollo marked a pivotal turning point in Delphi's history. As Apollo's reputation of a god of light, prophecy, and order spread throughout Greece, Delphi transformed from a modest local sanctuary into a Greek religious center. The construction of monumental temples, most notably the Temple of Apollo, began during this transformative period, and the influx of offerings, dedications, and visitors spurred rapid urban development. As Delphi's religious prominence grew, so too did its urban infrastructure. By the classical period, Delphi had evolved into a self-governing city that integrated both its sacred functions and everyday civic life. It was sort of like the Greeks' own Vatican City. The development of streets and public spaces, such as the Sacred Way, which was a grand processional route lined with treasuries and votive monuments. These all served the arterial network connecting all the various parts of the sanctuary. Markets and civic buildings began to appear alongside all the religious structures, catering to the needs of both the residents and the constant stream of religious pilgrims. The local economy thrived on the exchange of goods and religious offerings, while workshops, housing, and administrative buildings provided the structural backbone for a growing population. Delphi was not only a spiritual center, but also an architectural marvel that showcased the achievements of ancient Greek art and engineering. The sacred precinct of Delphi included several monumental structures that have fascinated archaeologists and historians for centuries. Most notably for Delphi, the Temple of Apollo. It was constructed originally in the 7th century BCE and rebuilt multiple times following many catastrophic fires that it unfortunately ran into. The Temple of Apollo stood at the heart of Delphi. Its Doric columns and intricate decorations showcase the advanced state of the Greek architectural design and also its deep religious significance of the site itself. Apollo is at the heart of the Oracle of Delphi and the heart of Delphi itself. Also within Delphi is something called the Omphalos stone, which served as a symbolic marker of the world's center. The Omphalos was more than just a mere stone, though. It was an icon of cosmic order and divine connection. Ancient sources attest to how it was worshipped and its presence within the sanctuary, and it reinforced Delphi's status as a spiritual hub. Essentially, Delphi was believed to be the center of the earth. In addition to the temple, the sanctuary also boasted treasuries, altars, stoas, a theater, gymnasium, a stadium, and even a hippodrome. It was quite a marvel. Each of these structures, they all played a vital role in the religious, social, and commercial life of Delphi, transforming the city into a vibrant metropolis of sacred activity. Delphi's business was religion, and they did a really good job making it quite fun there. One of the most distinctive features of Delphi was the presence of numerous treasuries, small ornate buildings constructed by various Greek city-states. Multiple city-states also kind of controlled Delphi, which we'll get into. So these treasuries served as repositories for valuable dedications and offerings made to Apollo in gratitude for his divine favor. Cities such as Athens, Argos, Sipnos, and others, they left behind magnificent votive gifts that underscored their belief and desire to display their cultural and political influence within Delphi. Altars dedicated to the different deities, including the people of Chios and other communities, they line the sacred way leading up to the Temple of Apollo. These offerings not only celebrated victories in religious belief, but also testified to the widespread reverence for the divine at Delphi. Essentially, multiple gods all leading up to Apollo, showcasing that Delphi is the hub of faith and religion for ancient Greece. So let's get into all these gods and how they got there, and legend that started it all. So let's talk about the mythos and the religion that really brought Apollo to the rise and Delphi such a huge religious city. Long before the rise of Apollo's cult, the site of Delphi was actually dedicated to the worship of Gaia, the primordial earth goddess. Early traditions hold that the area was originally known as Pytho, named after the great serpent who lived in the middle of the earth. Back then, they believed that this serpent encompassed the middle of the earth, and it was like a snake, but also a dragon, how they kind of described it. Pythos can also be referred to as Python in the text as well. He was believed to preside over the Delphic oracle, which was in the center of Gaia, aka Mother Earth. Greeks considered the physical site of Delphi to be the center of the earth, represented by the Omphalos stone. Sorry, I'm going to keep mispronouncing that. Which they sometimes called the navel, and it said that Pytho guarded the stone. So the Omphalos stone was an actual stone lake located in Delphi. I'll put some pictures on the screen too. It sort of became like a symbolic thing, and they would carve like a stone to look like it. And I believe there's still one up there, but I found some pictures of it and I'll put them up. These were the most famous and revered beings in the ancient Greek and Roman worlds. This was the beginning of creation and earth and how everything works. But Pytho ended up becoming the enemy of the god Apollo. Once Greece started introducing the Olympian gods, these legends changed. Like many monsters, Pytho was prophesied as Gaia's son. In turn, Apollo had to eliminate him before he could establish a temple in Delphi. So this was like the Olympian gods versus the originals. The sacred confrontation. So, the transformation of the sanctuary from an earth-centered cult site to a temple dedicated to Apollo, it occurred gradually between the 11th and 9th century BCE. According to ancient myth, Delphi's sacred character is intrinsically bound to the dramatic exploits of Apollo itself, who's the god of light, order, and harmony. He very much was sort of talked about as if is similar to the sun gods of Egypt, which eventually became the one god religion. So it's quite interesting. In legendary accounts, Apollo is depicted as a serene yet determined deity who confronts and ultimately defeats Pytho, a colossal serpent. Even though he's supposed to be guarding Gaia's sacred domain, for some reason, I guess he decides he has to be taken out. I guess because the Olympian gods wanted to be the successors and the rulers and all this. So it's said that with his bow drawn and arrows released in rapid succession, Apollo vanquishes Pytho in a battle that symbolically represents the triumph of divine order over chaotic, concerned forces. This myth, with its vivid imagery of sunlit arrows and the dying breath of the monster's guardian, it provided a narrative framework that justified Apollo's claim to Delphi as his chosen sanctuary. In some versions of the myth, the fallen body of Pytho is said to have fallen into a deep chasm beneath the temple itself. And that particular thing, his body falling in, contributed to the source of the vapours used by the oracles to induce their trances. So it then became the thing that they used to actually create prophecy. So the intertwining of myth and natural phenomena is a recurring theme in the ancient world, and it set the stage for later scientific debates about the source of Pythia's visions. As the worship of Apollo spread across Greece, the sacred precinct of Delphi evolved into a repository of both ancient, earth-based rites and the new, more structured rituals associated with the god of light. This dual heritage, combining both the earth-inhabiting elements of Gaia and then the radiant celestial aspects of Apollo, it would come to define Delphi's complex religious character. So it was a city of combining old and new. The evolution set the foundation for Delphi's emergence as a universal symbol of divine wisdom and cosmic order. The rise of the Oracle. Now, the oracles were brought back to the Omphalos stone. The sacred stone, being the navel or the center of the earth, it was the important cosmic connection and significance. They didn't see it as just a physical object. They saw it as being imbued with a deep theological and philosophical meaning. It represented the point of convergence between the terrestrial and the divine, the human and the celestial. Ancient writers such as Herodotus and Pausanias chronicled the high respect in which the stone was held. So with Delphi being the very center of the world, it was believed the oracle's messages were not only divinely inspired, but also universally relevant. This symbolic centrality really turned Delphi into a place where diverse cultures and political entities could come together under a common spiritual banner. So Delphi would be the place where people would go to get spiritual guidance. It evolved from just a shrine into a big institution that commanded reverence across the entire Greek world. So the Oracle of Delphi was not only a conduit for divine wisdom, but they also served as a symbol of unity among all the Greek city-states. It especially helped bring together states that were fighting with one another. So people would have religious pilgrimages. They would come from far and wide and journey to Delphi to consult the Pythia. The Pythia were the oracles. They were seeking guidance on matters ranging from personal dilemmas to the fate of the entire nations. The spiritual magnetism of Delphi was bolstered by its strategic positioning and its rich natural environment. Nestled on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, the sanctuary was imbued with an aura of mysticism and awe. Its remote location and breathtaking vistas contributed to the belief that Delphi occupied the very center of the world. The rituals and the process of prophecy. So at the heart of Delphi's mystique was the Pythia. These are the priestesses who served as oracles. The role of the Pythia was steeped in tradition and shrouded in secrecy. Traditionally selected from among the local women, often those of advanced age and reputed moral integrity. The Pythia was expected to lead a life apart from the conventional social roles of wife and mother. Her solitary existence within the sacred precinct, combined with her unique ability to communicate with the divine, rendered her an enigmatic figure in the ancient world. The selection process to find priestesses was very rigorous and deeply rooted in local tradition. Candidates for the role of Pythia were typically chosen based on their perceived spiritual purity and their ability to maintain the strict ethical and behavioral standards required by the sanctuary. Is very reminiscent of, Catholic priests. Once selected, the Pythia was bound by strict codes. They had to live in seclusion, their life dedicated entirely to the service of Apollo and the fulfillment of the oracle's duties. Now let's talk a little bit about the purification and preparation for the sacred rites. Before the Pythia could deliver her prophetic visions, she underwent a series of rigorous purification rituals designed to prepare both her body and her mind for communion with the divine. These purification rites were multifaceted and reflected the ancient Greeks' deep-seated belief in the transformative power of ritual. One of the things that she would have to do is fasting. Fasting was a common practice among the priestesses. By abstaining from food, and in some cases water, the Pythia was believed to purify her physical being and heighten her spiritual receptiveness. It was acts of self-denial that were part of the spiritual practices. So these acts of self-denial, they were considered essential for transcending the mundane and entering a heightened state of consciousness. And that's why even you see some people, I've seen some of them on TikTok, these, mediums, but they talk about like not drinking or eating while they're channeling. And I think they get it from the oracles here. It comes from history. Now, the next thing that they had to do is ceremonial baths. So they had ceremonial baths and immersion into sacred waters. The Pythia and her attendants would often bathe in the sacred waters of the Castalian and Cassotis springs. These rituals were imbued with symbolic significance, representing both physical and spiritual cleansing. This is also something that you see in a lot of pagan religions. We do it for druidic stuff and everything. Like I've done it for my rituals. Immersions in these waters was thought to wash away any impurities, allowing the Pythia to approach the divine with an unblemished or clean spirit. As well, they may also use oils and anoint themselves. Some traditions pointed to Pythia anointing themselves with oils and other sacred substances. These anointing rituals were believed to consecrate the body, rendering it a suitable vessel for the divine inspiration. Essentially, they're giving their body for the divine to enter it and then talk through their body. So they would use specific botanical extracts and resins, sometimes with mild psychoactive properties, which this is a theory that some scientists have. It further underscores the complex interplay between the physical substances and spiritual experience that the oracles had. So then once they're prepared, now they're ready to go into their sacred seat. Central to the Pythia's ritual was her position on a tripod within the inner sanctum of the Temple of Apollo. A tripod, it wasn't merely a practical seat, it was actually a symbol of stability, divine favor, and the connection between the earthly and the celestial. I do find it interesting because the imagery of three and the Trinity, it gets passed down in ancient pagan religions like this, and it eventually makes it into Catholicism as well. So according to legend, the tripod was placed directly above the chasm from which the Vapours were coming up. And it was a physical reminder of Apollo's victory over Pytho and the sacred energies that permeated the site. So the center itself, it was confined in a space within the temple. It was accessible only to the Pythia and a select group of priests. This inner chamber was designed to intensify the mystical experience. So it was kind of like I can't think of the word, but where you like deprive all your senses. And if you take psychoactive substances at the same time, like people do this to try to get into connecting with the divine. Like there are people that do this kind of stuff even now today. So it messes with the mind as well, being in like a confined area and not hearing or seeing anything, right? So they're doing like a combination of psychoactive substances mixed with just psychological manipulation as well. Also, within this room, it had limited ventilation and dim or no lighting. It created an atmosphere in which the boundaries between the material world and the divine seemed to blur. It really created the scene, setting the stage for Pythia's trance-like states. I recommend watching or reading The Altered States. There's a movie called Altered States, and there's a book with it as well. And it's actually based on a real sensory deprivation research with psychoactive substances, and it goes into stuff like this. And if you watch that movie, even it's very moving and helps you understand a little bit more about putting yourself into deprivation and what it does to the human mind, and helps you understand a little bit more about how powerful the human mind really is and the things that it can make you see and do. It was very much like a show to see these oracles in action. It looked probably just amazing and so mystical and just out of this world for anyone who's watching. So once she's seated upon her tripod, the Pythia would enter an ecstatic state, is what they called it, a trance during which she was believed to channel divine messages of Apollo. The nature of this trance has been a subject of scholarly debate for centuries. Ancient accounts describe the Pythia as entering a state of ecstatic possession, during which she uttered fragmented and often cryptic statements. These utterances, delivered in an apparently disordered fashion, were then interpreted and rendered into polished verses by the temple priests and priestesses. So essentially, she just blurted out words, and then they would make a prediction. They'd make the words into sentences to make a prediction. A famous example of the inherent ambiguity, oh my God, I'm having trouble saying that word today, in the oracle's language is the phrase, "You will go, you will return, not in the war you shall die," from a promise of safe return to a forewarning of fatality in battle. Such dualities in a statement, it contributed to the mystique of the oracle. It allowed for multiple interpretations and rendered the prophecies both elusive and profound. And even psychics do that nowadays too. It's like Barnum statements. It's just generalized statements that you turn into your own prophecy that could be valid for anyone that's coming to visit. And that's sort of what was happening here. Seasonal and astrological dimensions. So consulting the oracle, it was not a constant, unregulated practice. Instead, it was actually subject to strict dates. You could only come certain dates throughout the year. And it had ritual restrictions as well. So it added like layers to the meanings of the oracle's process. It wasn't like you could just go every day. Initially, the Pythia was only consulted on the 7th day of the Delphic month, a day believed to coincide with Apollo's birthday. The periodic schedule not only reinforced the divine association of the oracle, but it also imbued the process with a sense of cosmic order. Furthermore, ancient sources suggest that the oracle was not active during the winter months, when Apollo was thought to be residing within the mythical Hyperboreans. In later traditions, during these periods where he was away, the responsibility of the oracle's function was sometimes transferred to Dionysus, adding another mythological dimension to the seasonal cycle. The intersection of astrological timing, ritual practice, and cultural symbolism underscores the complexity of the whole process and its deep entwinement with all the religious and cosmological systems of ancient Greece. Delphi's influence on politics, war, and culture. So with all this, politics became intertwined with Delphi. Delphi's political and religious significance was further enhanced by the inclusion of what would be called the Amphictyonic League. I'm going to say this really wrong because it's hard to say. The Amphictyonic League had long been charged with protecting the sanctuary, which played a pivotal role in the management of Delphi. Essentially, this league was religious and political. It was made up of people from 6 different ancient Greek tribes, and it centered around sacred sites. They were there to maintain the sanctity of these places and foster cooperations among member states. So they were also mediating as well between disagreements. This council oversaw religious festivals, the conduct of Pythian games, and the resolution of dispute among the various city-states with an interest in Delphi. And yes, Delphi also had Pythian games, and that was on top of the Olympic Games. And, throughout its history, control over Delphi was fiercely contested. That's why they tried to give control to these 6 representatives as a fair way to handle the city. The League's ability to maintain a semblance of order and neutrality amidst the power struggles was central to Delphi's enduring reputation as a sacred and unassailable institution. But over time, as the urban character of Delphi evolved, the influence of the council gradually waned. Nonetheless, its legacy remains embedded into historical record as an example of early interpolitical cooperation and religious governance. As well, the oracles of Delphi had huge influence over the people. It influenced war itself and entire states too. It was far beyond the confines of the temple itself. For centuries, the Pythia's prophetic utterances were consulted by leaders, military commanders, and ordinary citizens alike. The Oracle's counsel was sought before embarking on major military campaigns, undertaking colonization efforts, or enacting any important political reforms. A well-known episode in ancient history is the consultation of the Oracle during the Persian Wars. According to historical accounts, Themistocles, an Athenian strategist, he interpreted a cryptic oracle message where they said wooden walls, and he took it as he had to build a fleet of ships. And that decision actually played a pivotal role in Greeks' victory at the Battle of Salamis. Similarly, the oracle's predictions were integral to the decisions made by Croesus, the king of Lydia, whose fateful consultation is often credited with triggering the downfall of his own empire. Because the oracle was only accessible for a limited number of days each month, the demand for her insights was extraordinarily high. Pilgrims from every corner of the Greek world, as well as from foreign lands, they flocked to Delphi, often incurring considerable expenses to secure an audience with the Pythia. Ritual payments in the form of pelanos, a specially prepared cake, and the sacrifice of a black goat were customary. And these offerings not only served a religious function, but also helped to finance the upkeep of the sanctuary. The economic impact of these pilgrimages was substantial. The city made huge amounts of money from it and relied on it. The sanctuary of Delphi functioned as a hub of commerce and religious exchange, where the flow of precious offerings and dedications, it underscored its status at the center of ancient spirituality. So all of these contributions of money that they're made, combined with the political clout of the city-states that built the treasuries in there and built monuments at Delphi, it cemented the oracle's role as an institution of both spiritual and temporal authority. In commemoration of Apollo's victory over Pytho, the sanctuary of Delphi hosted the Pythian Games every 4 years. It was a festival that paralleled the more widely known Olympic Games. These games, they encompass athletic contests, musical performances, artistic exhibitions, thereby reinforcing the cultural and religious significance of the site. So it wasn't just athletic stuff, it was also, intellectual and creative things too. The victors at the Pythian Games were awarded laurel wreaths, a symbol intimately associated with Apollo, and the games themselves served as a unifying force among the Greek city-states. So this stuff really gave everyone a pride in their, culture, and people were able to leave their problems at the door. The literature and science behind the Vapours. All right, so let's get into discussing the Vapours. What are the theories of what was happening? Were they getting high? Were they just faking it? What was going on with these oracles? One of the mysteries surrounding the oracle is the phenomena that enabled the Pythia to enter the trance states, these Vapours. Modern scientific inquiry has long sought to explain the altered states of consciousness experienced by the priestess. Much of this research has focused on natural hydrocarbon gases that may have been coming out of the ground based on the description that people had. According to the hypothesis of these scientists that are looking into the gases, they believe gases such as ethylene and methane, which are emitted from deep fissures and faults beneath the Temple of Apollo, that they could have produced narcotic effects when inhaled in the enclosed space. So in this small environment, people think that all these gases may have caused hypoxia, which is a reduction in available oxygen. And neurological effects such as euphoria, altered perception, and hallucinations come along with all that too. The neurotoxic effects in combination with the psychological stress generated from the ritual context, you just put your mind into that trance of this ritual, together, it may have culminated in ecstatic trance-like states described in the ancient texts. These gases don't currently come out though right now. So a lot of this stuff is they're looking at multiple things to try to figure out what the real answer is. The geology of Delphi is very complex, with the site located at a point where several tectonic plates meet, so the site has changed and moved quite a bit since back then. Tectonic activity has created fault lines that pass directly beneath the sanctuary itself, which is interesting that they made it the center of the earth, because it probably did move and other things over the years too, so that's interesting. Research done by geologists, notably scientist G.L. Deboer and his colleagues, they identified trace amounts of ethylene, which is a sweet-smelling gas, which is known to have anesthetic properties. And they found traces of this in the spring waters. And they found it in some rock deposits as well, which in the rock that's formed by calcium carbonate at the bottom of the spring. So it's like the little rocks that are in the groundwaters. The effects of ethylene include euphoria, mild hallucinations, altered perceptions. They're pretty consistent with the description of the Pythia's trance. So this scientific theory of the vapors centers on the idea that naturally occurring hydrocarbon gases, such as the ethylene, methane, and ethane, they had to have emerged from these fault lines, and they had to be coming up underneath her, and that must be what she's breathing. They found many fractured limestone and stuff in the caves and all along, like it's just there's constantly moving stones. So these geological conditions that could provide like a mechanism for the seepage of these gases. So the whole thing with this vapor theory is it's a natural explanation for the Pythia's visionary trances and utterances and the apparent divine inspiration behind them. It's just a way to kind of rationalize it for some people, some scientists. But if we take a look at some of the literature and the historical record, ancient literary sources lend support to the vapor theory as well. Plutarch, who served as a priest at Delphi, described sweet-smelling emission coming from the chasm near the oracle. Other ancient authors similarly refer to the presence of a mysterious exhalation that could induce states of divine frenzy in the priestesses. And these descriptions have been interpreted by modern scholars as evidence that the ancient Greeks themselves recognized that a natural phenomena was, the underlying cause for the oracle to go into these states. As well, in their writing, they mention something called pneuma, which means breath, wind, or vapor. And they think that some people have translated thinking that it must mean the vapors coming out as well, and the also inhalation that she's doing. The recurring motif of an exhaled sweet-smelling gas in ancient texts, it really suggests that early observers may have connected the oracle's trances with what was happening in the environment here. Even if they couldn't fully explain or understand the science behind it, they recognized that the vapors were doing something. Ritual consumables. Additionally, as I mentioned before, there were some anointing and there were some consumables that people were looking at. Outside of just the gases, the Pythia's ritual practices may have also created some psychoactive situations because they were using botanicals with psychoactive properties during their ritual preparation. The laurel tree, sacred to Apollo, is most frequently cited in ancient texts as an emblem of divine inspiration. However, other plants, including oleander, cannabis, hyoscyamus, rhododendron, they've also been proposed as possible agents that could have contributed to the Pythia's altered states. Ancient ritual texts and iconography suggest that the ingestion or chewing of leaves, as well as the consumption of specially prepared potions, may have been part of Pythia's, preparation for the sessions. So these botanical substances could have been acting synergistically with the environment as well. It amplified the whole trance-like state that she was going into, and it provides like a multifaceted explanation that combines all these different things that were going on. A lot of people propose like the oracle experience, it wasn't just the gases, it was like a combination of many things. The deliberate use of purification rites, fasting, ritual immersion in sacred waters, it all served to prime Pythia's mind for a state of transcendence. So, she may have possibly been intoxicated between the vapors and the psychoactive botanicals. It created just a big, synergistic situation where she could just see things and say things. It created the whole theater of it all. And this whole thing, it could explain some of these like crazy prophecies that we've heard over time and why she was consistent over the centuries. When we look at this stuff, it is important to view things from all angles because all these things are complex. It's not just like one thing that caused it. There's many layers to these religious practices. Alternative explanations. Although the vapor theory makes sense, and most people have always thought that it was the vapors, a lot of criticisms have emerged over it. People that are saying that they don't think that that's what was going on. One of the central challenges to the hypothesis, the vapor hypothesis, is the question of whether the concentration of gases could have realistically reached levels high enough to induce the trance states. And, they said that they did the math and that it could, but some people disagree. There's researchers Foster and Lehu have argued that the natural emissions, while present, would likely have been too sparse to produce the dramatic neurotoxin effects that are often attributed to them. Moreover, if the Pythia were regularly exposed to high concentrations of these, one might expect to find historical evidence of severe health problems or premature mortality among the priestesses. And that is a good point, like with that, right? Because they can't control how much they're intaking. You would think that you would hear of them getting sick a lot. The available historical records indicate that the Pythia generally enjoyed very long and healthy lives. So this casts doubt on the likelihood that they were subjective to these toxic vapors on a regular basis. Another major critique of the vapor theory involves a hypothesis as well that a combination of carbon dioxide and methane could have led to oxygen deprivation within the enclosed temple chamber. Essentially, there wasn't enough oxygen in the chamber. It wasn't really about vapors. It was sort of about not enough oxygen. While it's true that hypoxia, which can be caused not enough oxygen, can induce symptoms such as dizziness, euphoria, and even hallucinations, the clinical presentation of oxygen deprivation is usually accompanied by a host of undesirable symptoms, including nausea, headaches, and a sense of suffocation. And there were other priests and stuff in that room too, making note of, what she was saying. So like they weren't getting sick. Importantly, ancient descriptions of Pythia's state emphasize a sweet smelling quality to the vapor that was coming out or the whatever was happening below her. And overall, they talk about divine inspiration rather than anyone looking distressed or like they're, struggling to breathe. So critics argue that oxygen deprivation alone does not fully account for the prolonged, controlled, and seemingly positive trance states reported in the historical record. Inconsistencies between the clinical effects of hypoxia and the actual descriptions of, what the Pythia was doing in her experience, it suggests that the vapor theory may be incomplete or oversimplified. The psychological. So beyond purely the chemical side of things, many modern scholars are emphasizing the critical role of the psychological and ritualistic factors in shaping the Pythia's experience. Our brain is very powerful and we can convince ourselves of stuff and we can get into these trances. The ritual context at Delphi was one of intense spiritual expectation, rigorous purification, and focused mental discipline. The Pythia, the priestesses, they were fasting. They were doing prolonged fasting. They were, immersing themselves in sacred waters, isolating themselves from the outside world. This would put them into like an altered state of consciousness. They were choosing also to be in this altered state too. And they could do this just purely through psychological means. Neuroscientific studies have shown that factors such as sensory deprivation, hyperventilation, and the stress of performing sacred rites can lead to altered mental states and vivid hallucinations. Yeah, and sensory deprivation, like we can trick our mind into a lot of stuff with that. The strong cultural expectation that the oracle would deliver divine messages could have also acted as a self-fulfilling prophecy, inducing the Pythia to interpret her internal experiences as a communication from Apollo, which is, how I explain a lot of psychics now, the ones who truly believe they're psychic. They think whatever pops into their head is the message, and that's essentially what Pythia was doing. In this view, the trance-like states of Pythia might be better understood as the product of a complex interplay between ritual-induced psychological stress and the power of suggestion, rather than being solely attributed to chemical agents. However, I could see if they were using botanicals that were psychoactive and then the psychological. Personally, I think it's the combination. Multiple factors at work. And that leads into, increasingly popular perspective amongst a lot of scholars is that the oracle, it can't be reduced to a single cause. It must be a multifaceted thing that caused these visions. People believe that the extraordinary visions of the Pythia were the result of several factors. We have environmental, physiological, psychological, and cultural. If hydrocarbon gases were present at the site, their effects would have interacted with Pythia's mental state and the ritual itself and the cultural beliefs about divine inspiration. Because these people, they were true believers, right? And that does play a role in what people experience. The synergistic model, it pretty much is putting forward that even low-level gas emissions might have contributed to like a baseline of an altered state, right? Got her a little bit high. And then you combine that with the intense focus and expectations generated by the ritual practice. Also her fasting. So feeling a little bit lightheaded. There's botanicals involved. So all of this could have been magnified as well during the whole event too. The trances described in the ancient accounts and the way that she acted, she's really getting into it. She truly believed what she was doing. So in other words, the natural environment provided a physiological trigger that was then amplified by the psychological and cultural forces that were happening during ritual. Such an integrated approach challenges the notion that a simple gas hypothesis can fully explain the mystical experiences at Delphi. It must be multiple factors. It underscores the need to consider Pythia's visions as the product of multifaceted process, where natural phenomena and human belief systems converge together to produce what was perceived as divine inspiration. Delphi's fall and rediscovery. The history of Delphi is marked by cycles of occupation, destruction, and renewal. The sanctuary was at the epicenter of several sacred wars, conflicts fought over the control of its immense religious wealth. In 191 BCE, Delphi fell into Roman hands and subsequently they, sacked everything. The coffers were emptied, all the treasures were gone. Following the rise of Christianity and the decline of pagan traditions, Delphi gradually fell into disuse and forgotten about. The early medieval period saw the abandonment of the sanctuary, and it wasn't until the Renaissance and later in the 18th, 19th century that Western scholars and travelers rediscovered the ruins of Delphi and actually were trying to find out the history of it all and retelling the story. They played a crucial role in documenting the ruins of Delphi. Their accounts and sketches paved the way for the archaeological excavations that followed. There's some going on still to this day in the area. And thus, enriched our understanding of the ancient wonder of Delphi and the oracles. Today, Delphi is recognized as one of the most important archaeological sites in Greece. It's part of the Parthenos National Park and has been designated a World Heritage Site. For centuries, the Oracle of Delphi was much more than a mere religious curiosity. It was a cornerstone of ancient political and cultural life. The story of the Oracle of Delphi embodies mystery, resilience, and transformation, a bridge between myth and history, the natural and the divine. From Apollo's mythic triumph over Pytho to its rise as a pan-Hellenic institution, Delphi has captivated people for over 2.5 millennia. Delphi stands as a monument to humanity's enduring quest for meaning, searching for answers. But tell me, what do you think about Delphi and the oracles? What do you think about what they saw or what was affecting them? Leave a comment below and let me know. As well, if you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. It does help the channel out quite a bit. And also, I want to thank all the members. Thank you for your support. It really does mean a lot and it does help out with everything. As well, if you want to join membership, just a reminder that membership includes early access to videos. There's also special access sometimes where you'll have early access for like a week or something. Then there's a member only video once in a while. And anytime things are in member only mode, it's ad free too. You can see all the details of all the membership perks down below if you hit the join button. But that is it for this video. Thank you guys for stopping by, and I hope you enjoyed the little journey through some history.